July 14th, 2007, a teenager who starred on the junior edition of Stars in Their Eyes was found bludgeoned to death with her mother and younger brother. On Thursday evening, police discovered the remains of Beverly Samuels, 35, a nurse, her daughter Kesha Wizzart, 18, and her son Fred, 13, at their cul-de-sac home in Fallowfield, Manchester. They all sustained head injuries. Police this night identified a 32-year-old man wanted in connection with the horrific murders. Pierre Williams, the mother's lover, was described by locals as 5 feet 8 inches 1.72 meters tall and of average build. Mr. Williams, who grew up in Moss Side, Manchester, but just moved to Birmingham, has a cream tattoo on his right arm and several tattoos on his chest. Superintendent Peter Saville stated, Pierre was a friend of the mother. He was a friend she hadn't seen since pretty lately. Kesha, who aspired to study law at the University of Manchester, just finished her A-levels at Pars Wood Sixth Form College in Didsbury. She debuted on the junior version of ITV Stars in Their Eyes in 2004, aged 15, mimicking Toni Braxton, an American R&B artist, with the song Unbreak My Heart. Neighbors described heartbreaking scenes as family members, including Ms. Samuel's previous husband, Fred Wizzart, 38, a sales manager, arrived to learn of the deaths. Jamie Smith, 21, a neighbor, stated, I saw Fred. He was pacing the plaza, holding his head in his hands. He seemed devastated. The parents separated early in the children's lives, but according to friends, Mr. Wizzart was a loving father who was concerned about their well-being. Ms. Samuels worked at the Manchester Royal Infirmary. Her son, who claimed to have learning challenges, went to St. John Vianney School in Salford. He was well known in the neighborhood for riding his bike with other kids and providing free bicycle maintenance services in his garden. Kesha completed 11 GCSEs at Trinity Church of England High School, home. She recently finished her A-levels, which gave her the freedom to put her days as a recluse behind her, as she stated in her Facebook profile. According to a statement from Manchester Royal Infirmary, Ms. Samuels was a very popular member of the team who would be sorely missed. Greater Manchester Police stated that the murders were not believed to be gang-related. They wanted to convince the neighborhood that they weren't looking for a random killer. Mr. Saville stated, we have significant lines of inquiry, and many officers have been assigned to investigate. I can assure the public that this is not a widespread threat to the larger community. We are absolutely determined to find the person responsible for these despicable murders. The police refused to comment on a claim that an argument had occurred outside the home. They declined to comment on claims that the victims were discovered in separate rooms or died at different times. A man has been arrested in connection with a triple murder. On July 14th, 2007, a man was arrested today on suspicion of murdering 3 members of a Manchester family, police said. Unemployed Pierre Williams, 32, was arrested in Birmingham after Kesha Wizzart, 18, her mother Beverly Samuels, 36, and brother Fred, 13, were discovered dead in their house in Fallowfield on Thursday evening. Detectives said last night that they were actively looking for Williams, a former friend of Mrs. Samuels. The couple had been friends, but they hadn't seen each other in a long time. According to a Greater Manchester Police spokesman, Williams called police in the early hours of this morning, and local officers responded to his residence, where he was detained. Greater Manchester Police detectives were scheduled to question him today in Birmingham. The dead were discovered by a member of the public at the family's terraced home on Thelwall Avenue around 7 p.m. On Thursday, Kesha, who debuted on Young Stars in Their Eyes in 2004 at the age of 15, was discovered dead with major head injuries alongside her mother, who worked as a nurse at Manchester Royal Infirmary. Her teenage sibling, who suffered from learning disabilities, was also discovered dead nearby. A GMP spokesman said a 32-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after the bodies of 2 women and a boy were discovered at a house on Thelwall Avenue in Fallowfield on Thursday, July 12th. GMP was made aware of this arrest at 5 a.m. today. Officers from the GMP's major incident team are en route to the city to question the individual, who remains in police custody. Kesha is said to have completed her A-levels at Pars Wood High School in Didsbury just a few weeks ago. The adolescent aspired to be a singer after performing a Toni Braxton song on ITV's talent show and being recommended for greatness by a local music producer. She had planned to study law at the University of Manchester and told friends she aspired to be a barrister, but she had always hoped to become famous for her singing. Mrs. Samuels had divorced from her long-term partner and the children's father, IT worker Fred Wizzart. Mr. Wizzart returned to his children's home on Thursday night after the bodies were discovered and was consoled by neighbors. He was heard yelling, "Why my children?" in the street. Williams grew up in Manchester's Moss Side neighborhood but has lately lived in Birmingham. Superintendent Paul Saville declined to answer questions about where the 3 bodies were discovered in the house or how they died. He also declined to speculate on the likely reason for the attacks. He remarked, "These murders are horrific, and as I am sure you can understand, the victims' families and friends are devastated. We are absolutely determined to find the person responsible for these despicable murders and will not rest until they are brought to justice." Kesha also had a CD made of her music after beating out hundreds of other musicians in a competition hosted by Manchester's local radio station, Carnival FM. A talent show girl was bludgeoned to death by her mother's ex-lover. Times Online, February 22, 2008. A bright pupil who performed on the junior version of Stars in Their Eyes was bludgeoned to death alongside her mother and younger brother, Manchester Crown Court heard yesterday. Kesha Wizzart, 18, was a hard-working young woman, according to the jury. Pierre Williams, 33, her mother's previous lover, bound the teen's hands behind her back and sexually attacked her in the early hours of July 12, 2017. Kneeling on her back, he dealt lethal blows with a hammer or similar blunt instrument with such force that her ear was severed. Kesha's mother, Beverly Samuels, 36, was savagely raped before having her skull crushed with an engineer's hammer. Her 13-year-old son, Fred's body was discovered next to her, covered in a duvet. Ray Wigglesworth, QC, opening for the prosecution, told the jury this was not, however, a frantic attack by a man throwing reckless and indiscriminate punches. The 3 victims were murdered with accurate and purposeful blows to the head. The prosecution claims that these were execution-style murders. Mr. Williams, 33, from Birmingham, denies murder. Mr. Wigglesworth told the jury that Ms. Samuels had an intermittent connection with Mr. Williams in 2005 after her marriage ended. Mr. Williams, who lived in the Midlands, she had a habit of abruptly visiting Ms. Samuel's semi-detached property in Fallowfield, South Manchester. Friends were startled to see him there in July. Ms. Samuels told her niece, Selena Brown, that he had remained the night, but she declined to have sex with him because she was menstruating. She said that the defendant had gone off in a rage. The following day, Kesha, who lived with her father, opted to spend the night with her mother. A cab dropped her off at the property in the early hours. The prosecution claims that Kesha, her mother, and her brother were murdered between 3:15 and 7:30 a.m. Wigglesworth stated Pierre Williams cruelly murdered the family in their own house. The scientific evidence indicates that the murder weapon was an engineer's hammer with a long wooden shaft, and that each of the victims died as a consequence of heavy blows to the head with this weapon. Ms. Brown raised the alarm after climbing a ladder and seeing into Ms. Samuel's bedroom, where she noticed the shape of her body and blood on the wall. Mr. Wigglesworth claimed that Mr. Williams stole 4 mobile phones and sold 1 to a taxi driver who drove him to Stockport train station and 3 to a Birmingham dealer for PS60. Mr. Williams was detained shortly thereafter in Birmingham. When questioned by detectives in Manchester, he replied, "No comment." Mr. Wigglesworth stated that expert witnesses will not rule out the likelihood that Ms. Samuels was struck with a single, crippling blow, and that the murderer returned later to finish her off. She was hit at least 7 times. The jurors watched a police video of the victims as they were discovered in the extremely blood-stained bedrooms. Kesha Wizzart was murdered where she lay. Mr. Wigglesworth stated. She was naked with her hands tied behind her back, and a pair of black pants had been placed on her head. Mr. Wigglesworth informed the jury that a trace of DNA containing some of Mr. Williams' DNA components was discovered on a bra. Mr. Williams' shorts with semen were discovered in the laundry basket. Forensic scientists traced bloodied trails from Mr. Williams' unique Timberland shoes to the crime scene. A hammer was taken from MS Samuel's bed. Mr. Wigglesworth recounted Mr. Williams' violent tendencies. He was accused of raping the same lady twice in 2003. He became sexually violent the first time she refused to have sex with him. He tied her hands behind her back, raped her, and assaulted her with an item, claiming she would never be able to have sex again. On the second occasion, he forced his way into the woman's home and attempted sexual intercourse, but she managed to flee. Mr. Wigglesworth said, Kesha Wizzart was a clever and hard-working young woman with a promising future. In 2004, she gained widespread prominence when she starred on national television in the series Young Stars in Their Eyes. MS. Samuel's previous husband, Fred Wizzart, will describe her in court as a very outgoing person. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone who had anything negative to say about her. Their son Fred was described as a typical 13-year-old who enjoyed music, clothes, friends, and tinkering with bicycles. Pierre Williams is sentenced to life in prison for the murder of a 3-member family. Times Online, March 7th, 2008. A gym instructor fought with court guards Wednesday after being found guilty of bludgeoning to death a student who performed on the junior version of Stars in Their Eyes, her mother, and her younger brother. Pierre Williams, 33, used a steelhead hammer to murder his former lover. Beverly Samuels, a 36-year-old nurse, her daughter, Kesha Wizzart, 18, and son, Fred, 13. 3 security guards rushed to hold Williams, who was taken down to the cells at Manchester Crown Court following the verdict, while loudly professing his innocence. He was barred from the dock by the court, which eventually sentenced him to at least 38 years in prison.